Hey, what's up, guys? Little man with a big opinion here. Got my Diet Coke and a sink full of dishes and some thoughts on my mind. So, while I'm doing this, because I've got to make this video at 11 o'clock at night because the baby wanted to stay up much later than normal, we're going to discuss. I got a comment recently. I pretty sure the person was being sarcastic. Um, and I want to kind of go over what was said. But before I start doing that, uh, I've set a goal that I'd like to hit the 1,000 subscriber mark by the end of the year. We're doing pretty well right now, but we do need to tick those numbers up. So if you are watching this and you're not subscribed, just go ahead and hit the button. It helps the channel out. I think what helps out even more is when you share this video with a friend or family member, especially if you think this information is useful to them. And then, of course, liking the video if you enjoy the content. That tells YouTube that, maybe we should suggest it to other people. And, this is a niche topic, but not, you know, completely outlandish. So let's hop into what was said. I got a comment yesterday on one of my videos, and the guy was like, I subscribed to this channel when he made some videos about stocks, and now here I am coming back to it all these years later, and he's talking about something that's never going to happen. Um, that might not be what it was word for word, but pretty close to that. And so, I shot back. Well, he also said, that was the first part. I shot back with, we haven't had natural disasters, uh, food shortages before, uh, you know, going through a period of civil unrest and civil strife. None of that stuff's ever happened. Uh, and their comment was basically that stuff's been happening since 1776, and we're still here. You know, he's not wrong completely in what was said, uh, but I thought that could bring this topic to the idea of like standard things that we prepare for, and if you're not preparing for these things, then you know maybe this makes you think about it. Uh, so the whole the whole idea of prepping for me is I want to stay as close to what's going on right now as I possibly can. I've got a long way to go. Um, you know, because that involves power and running water and eating meat and fruits and vegetables. And there's a lot that goes into this. Um, I think it's more than buying MREs and ammo, and you're gonna survive World War III. I very much would still like to watch the shows that I want to watch. Uh, sleep comfortably in, 70-degree temperature. Stay warm in 20-degree temperature. Drink my Diet Coke. Play video games. Read books. Be able to, take medicine when I get sick. Very, very basic level of staying close to normal. Uh, so, like, near the very top of this list can be job security. Let's say you lose your job. Now, what goes into keeping life as close to normal if you lose your job? Obviously, let's say your monthly expenses are $2,800. I use that example because that's what I pay a month for everything that I pay for. That's Netflix and electric and mortgage and like everything is a flat 2,800. That is like the bare minimum. So simple numbers says if I have 2,800 saved up, then I can go without a job for 1 month. That doesn't take into account inflation, stuff going up or down. But on that same note, I could put away some rice and beans and oatmeal, pick up some MREs. And that is food that's going to last a fairly decent amount of time. And, now I lose that job. And my food budget in a month is $450. You know, I'm usually feeding 3.5 people, sometimes 4.5. And yes, that number can technically go up because sometimes my grandmother, like today, she said she wanted pizza, so we got pizza. But let's say I have 6 weeks worth of food set aside because, instead of buying the 7 cans of fruit when it was time to, do the weekly grocery shopping, I bought 10. And the next time I did weekly grocery shopping, I bought 10. And, before long, I've got, canned fruit falling out of the pantry. But now I'm 4 or 5 weeks ahead with the canned fruit. You lose your job, the savings that I have, I'm now not worrying about the food part of it. Now I'm worried about the electrical, the gas, the water, all the other stuff. And if it doesn't come down to that, then we are practicing safe food storage, long-term food storage, and so it can almost be bought and forgot about. All of my rice and beans and oats gets frozen to kill any of the small bugs, and then sealed inside a mason jar or a Mylar bag with a oxygen absorber. And the science says that it should last indefinitely. I'm also locking in the price of those staples at today's value. I went back and looked at one of my video, and a 50-pound bag of rice has gone up like $2.50 in a 5-year period. So it's, not a significant, oh my gosh, what are we going to do amount. But I've got 8 months worth of rice set aside. And, it's still at 2019 prices, 2018 prices. So, it's not quite falling in the same category as, buying gold and silver as an investment. I also say a small amount of that is thinking about prepping because we've used precious metals for basically as long as we've known about them. But, so the putting the food aside, setting up a rain catchment system, and that's stepping up the advanced level a little bit. But you can't pay your water bill. Oh no, the world's not gonna end and fall apart. Your family still has, access to drinking water. Uh, on that same note, I went back and looked, and there have been 5 times throughout this year that we've been under a boil water notice. Uh, 2 of them were, natural disaster related. We just got copious amounts of rain, and it messed up the system. They had to do some repairs. The other 3 times that it happened was planned out. They told us in advance, hey, you're gonna lose uh, access to drinking water for roughly 6 hours. We've got to, cut this pipe open, fix it, and then it's got to do a flush. So there was plenty of times where I'm glad that I have 5-gallon water storage, because it didn't really affect us. We just kept going full steam ahead. I don't live near the coast anymore. Like, we still get rain from hurricanes, but none of the really bad wind, none of the super crazy amounts of rain. But flash flooding is a problem. Tornadoes are a problem. Wildfires are a problem. Natural disasters don't care where you live. Planning accordingly. You can be considered a prepper because you live in Tornado Alley, so your family dug a hole in the ground, stacked up some cinder blocks, and now you've got a spot to go in case of tornadoes. Owning a chainsaw. I remember 2 or 3 years ago, we had 2 tornadoes tear through the county. One was roughly half a mile away from our house, and me and several other like-minded individuals were all basically out there about 20 minutes after the storm ended, and we were cutting up trees because there was like 15 homes destroyed. Uh, you know, we wanted the fire department and EMS to be able to deal with that problem and not be tired from having to clear the roadway to get there and save people. And I've got 2 chainsaws. I brought enough fuel to probably fill both of them up 8 or 9 times. When one guy's chainsaw quit working halfway through, I said, hey, in the back of the truck, I've got another one back there. Everything should be good to go. I wasn't the only one that brought extra fuel. So when someone's chainsaw, ran out because they only put, they didn't put anything in it. It only had like a quarter, I'd say about a quarter left in it. He was locked, loaded, ready to go very, very quick because one of the guys pointed out, hey, I got fuel in the van over there. That's considered being a prepper, is, having tools. I think every guy wants to have every power tool within whatever brand that they get. And if you're anything like me, you never just buy the tool. You go ahead and spend, 20, 30, 40 extra dollars to make sure you get one that comes with a battery. Because it's almost like a social status to have, dozens and dozens of batteries for whatever, tool brand you have. So, something else to think about. Other common weather issues, and like we're getting ready for winter. Fall started a couple of days ago, and millions of humans have died. I couldn't tell you an exact number from the extremes of the temperatures, whether it's hot or cold. Um, getting an extra jacket, having sleeping bags, getting a little bit of firewood if you got a fireplace or a wood burning stove. Um, having a propane heater, candles, extra blankets, their hand warmers. I feel like, me and the wife, and at the time, our dog and like our 6 cats made it through the winter freeze because I had more stuff, because I had prepared for it. We were living in a townhome that had a fireplace, and I spent a Saturday chopping up and stacking wood in my garage. I was living in Corpus Christi, so I couldn't just. It was probably a 45-minute drive to the closest place to actually get firewood. We lost power because the electric company that we had got their power from wind turbines. They got way too cold, and we were 6 days without power. And the entirety of that 6 days, we had a fire in the fireplace. I had hung up tarps to our second story, uh, to keep the air from traveling up there. Trying to make it to where we didn't have to warm up the entire townhome. Um, you know, our stove up there was, or down there was electric, and my Coleman camp stove and 6 or 7 propane bottles, made it very very easy to cook, any of the food that I had. We ate Mountain House meals. The stuff in our freezer, I was able to put in a cooler and just leave it outside because it was cold enough for that. Uh, and we had plenty of, blankets and sleeping bags and stuff. I think it also helped that the cats basically slept on top of us the entire time. But, no injuries. We were very comfortable. I had a couple friends come over to our place because, you know, one of them was able to get like a pack of hand warmers at the gas station. And after a couple hours, he realized that wasn't going to cut it. We're covered up with all of our blankets and we still feel like we're freezing. So they came and joined us. And, we camped out in our living room. And they were very, very grateful that someone had put in the effort to, be a little bit prepared. I feel like it wasn't cold enough and we had shelter that, we could have just been miserable for a few days. Uh, but, I really don't know because as soon as that crap hit the fan switch flipped, I was turning on the backup generators, if you, want to think about it like that. I was cleaning the poop up, before it had time to start to stink up the place. COVID happens. That's a perfectly good example of stuff just going out of stock. Uh, I had a handful of masks, and in the beginning when they said wear masks, it was like, sweet, I've got this stuff. Uh, and then they said, no, don't wear it, save it for the professionals. I was like, but I have it, and you're saying this is bad. And then, more and more stuff comes out, and, my work didn't even require us to wear stuff. Uh, which, I guess it makes sense. That was a delivery driver in college at that point. They just told us to ring the bell and leave the food. Uh, but I mean, toilet paper disappeared. You know, you get your paycheck, spend $20, set it, and I go to Sam's, spend $20 on the biggest thing of toilet paper you can get. It's not the best. If you wanted to, you could go ahead and spend like the 34 on the Charmin. Spend the $7 on a plastic tote. Put the toilet paper in the plastic tote, slide it under your bed, leave it in the garage, put it in your shed, find a closet. There's plenty of empty space. As long as you're willing, to find it. And that's locked in of the white gold. If it hits that point where you're wishing you had toilet paper, there's probably bigger problems. But that's something that, as long as that tote stays cool and dry, the toilet paper is probably going to last your entire life. Another simple thing is soap. This isn't Dawn in here anymore. We've had this container forever because it's just the squeeze. It's actually Gain. This original container was 18 fluid ounces. I really don't know how quickly we go through soap. But, buy the big industrial size container. Continue to refill, the easy usage one. And, the soap cleans grease. I'm not saying that's the best thing to make yourself smell good. But if you're dirty, good old dish soap is a lifesaver. Hygiene is super important. Buy the bigger container. It lasts longer. You get halfway through the big container, just go ahead and buy another one. When you empty that first one, you go ahead and you buy another one. And you can stack this stuff up very slowly. You could go all out. You just got a new credit limit on a credit card for 10 grand. You can buy a lot of this stuff in bulk and just kind of do a buy ones, cry ones. You can also treat it like a marathon and piece it together bit by bit. I've seen some people do a $5 Friday. I've done a couple of videos where I get 10 items for $1 at Family Dollar, Dollar Tree, places like that. You can spend $10 a week on prepping, or you can spend $10,000 a week on prepping. You're never gonna feel like you've hit enough. But on a basic level, I sleep better at night knowing I've got the stuff set aside. So, natural disasters, they happen all the time. I don't want to be stuck in a position where I am waiting for someone else to come help me out. I've done, handing out food after a natural disaster. Being in the state guard, they give us between 4 and 12 hours to ready up. I keep all my stuff in a go bag, and depending on where we have to go, it can then be a very long drive. Like, my brother got sent an hour away from where I'm at, and that was when he was in McAllen. He had to drive 6 hours to where its unit normally is in Houston, and then like another 6 or 7 hours up here. And that was a very, very quick response time for them. Um, well, that's just the driving part. That's not the all right. You know, time to get the vehicles ready, time to load up on the supplies, time to get to the location, time to set up, and then start handing it out. So the government, FEMA says 72 hours. They say 72 hours because that's how long, in their perfect world, it takes for them to get set up and have things flowing back into normal. If I don't have power, I don't want to wait 72 hours for something to be trying to fix it. If my grocery store is empty because they lost power and they had to throw everything that needed refrigeration out, and so everything else is off the shelves, or let's say stuff is on the shelves, I don't want to be fighting other people to try to get the food that I need to feed myself and my family. I'd rather already have it at home where I can sit and wait this thing out before stuff goes back to normal. I like to think I'm a good person, and not only using my skill that I learned using a chainsaw, the resources that I put into it, fuel, bar oil, chain sharpener, and my time, to go help my community out. I would like to think that myself and several others would also be helping to fill that gap. So something bad happens, we go out, we start having a big old cookout. Um, After Hurricane Harvey, me and a friend of mine, I keep bringing up chainsaws because it's a very simple thing. We ran chainsaws for like 12 or 13 hours a day for 2 or 3 weeks. And in that 2 or 3 weeks, I didn't pay a cent for any of my food. I mean, there were food trucks set up where if you pulled up and said, hey, I'm here helping to clean up, then, you got your breakfast burrito. You know, half the time, people, like there was a guy that had, his barbecue pit on a trailer, uh, and he pulled up, this neighborhood that we're in. There was probably 40 or 50 oak trees knocked over, and there was like 6 or 7 of us dudes there. We'd take breaks long enough to, let the chainsaws cool off for a few minutes while we refilled up, on water and Gatorade and stuff. And right around, 10:30, the guy shows up, gets the pit going, and he's got sausage and chicken and hot dogs, and you know he's got a cooler full of every beverage you can think of. You know, some of them probably not what we should have been drinking while we're trying to clean up, but it boosted morale. Uh, and dude stayed there for like an hour and a half, fed us as much food as we wanted, and basically said, you know, I'm driving around this whole area. If you're hungry, uh, and I've got food ready, just come up and get what you need, and then y'all get back to work. That's what the prepping gets us ready for. The prepping also, gets us ready for that World War III scenario. Uh, I'm a history teacher. We had tens of millions of victory gardens in the U.S. during World War II. I think they said our like vegetable output, grew by like 38% throughout the war, and a lot of that came from, hey, this family planted a 20 by 15-foot garden in their yard. They're offsetting the food cost, you know, a hundredth of a percentage point. But then you multiply it by the millions of homes in the U.S. doing it, and it was a big deal. It helped out a lot. That is something that I think a lot of us, um, like, we put that in the category of we're above that. If we needed, if our government right now, World War III happens and they said, hey, we need y'all to plant gardens, I'd say 40% of the population would just be like, no. Either because they don't like the current administration, or that requires a level of work that they just couldn't give a damn about. I'd say most of that 40% of the population also doesn't fully understand where their food comes from. And, in that scenario, and a lot of scenarios like that, putting the food away now, it goes back to what I said earlier about locking in the price. The eggflation crisis. They shot up really high for a couple of months, and now they're basically back to what they were before that. But there were some places where egg prices like 2.5 times. I like to eat eggs. That's why I'm getting ever so closer to having my own chickens. Backyard's almost ready for it. Part of it's knowing where my food comes from. I know what those chickens are eating to produce the eggs. I know roughly how many I'm going to get a week based off of the number of chickens I have. I also know that their food is cheaper than buying the amount of eggs that we want to eat from the store. And we can offset it even further because I want 8 chickens, and we're going to end up with about 2 dozen extra a week. If I can't find someone that wants to buy them for cheaper than Walmart selling them, which makes me think I will find someone, then I will find someone to give them to. And with the 2 extra dozen a week, that will more than enough pay for their feed, and it will help recoup the cost of the coop. So just food getting more expensive. That's a very simple reason to kind of bulk up on it now. I don't want to ramble on forever, but everything that I've said also falls into any and all of the other prepping situations. Like, obviously, I live far enough away from Yellowstone going off that it's not really going to affect where we live. But that's a regional thing. You should have, the mask with filters for that situation. I don't live, even within 200 miles of a nuclear power plant. So I'm not quite worried about that. I'm not worried about, a hurricane blowing my house down. But the outlandish stuff, like an alien invasion, zombie apocalypse, civil war could be moved out of the outlandish category, but that's totally different thing all in its own. But if you are doing the basic preps for any of those issues, then you're doing the basic preps for every single issue. The last thing I'll say is, the World War III happens. The bullets are important. You gotta fight off the Russians or whoever, is dumb enough to invade the U.S. if that were to happen in this situation. That's a different video in itself. I can talk about World War III pretty in depth. But we gotta talk about the other B's. Bullets are important, but so is bacon and beans and bandages. I could throw in basic hygiene. Uh, I can't really think of any other. The main stuff is, I like to say bacon, beans, and bandages, as well as bullets. Most of the prepping that I do is going to last a very long time. Like, I'm not dumping money into something that's just going to go bad and I wasted my money. So, hopefully that explains that well enough. This is one of my longer videos. I guess I was kind of passionate about this topic. If you have questions, leave them in the comment section down below. If you made it this far in the video and you're not subscribed, I don't know what you're doing. Just hit the subscribe button, hit the little bell too. It lets you know when I post videos. And lastly, share this video with a friend or family member. Now with that, catch you on the next one.